I walked into my grandfather's hospital room already calculating. That's the truth, and I'm not going to pretty it up for you. I am the CEO of a logistics company worth $200 million. I had exactly 40 minutes between meetings, and I had come, if I'm honest with myself, to make sure the will was still in my favor before he died. What I found instead stopped me in the doorway so completely that my assistant nearly walked into my back. A man I had never seen before in my life, black, maybe 35, in scrubs that didn't match the hospital's staff uniforms, a diaper bag slung over one shoulder and a sleeping toddler strapped to his chest, was sitting beside my grandfather's bed, holding his frail, spotted hand, laughing softly at something my grandfather had just whispered. My grandfather, the man who built an empire from a single trucking route, the man who taught me that sentiment was a liability in business. That man was holding a stranger's hand like it was the most natural thing in the world, and the stranger was holding his back with a tenderness I had not shown him in 15 years. I stood in that doorway and felt something I hadn't felt in longer than I could remember, the sensation of being, for the first time in my adult life, completely irrelevant to the person whose approval I had spent my entire career chasing. I had come for a will. What I found instead rewrote everything I thought I understood about my family, my grandfather, and myself. My name is Victoria Sinclair Marsh, and by 38, I had built the kind of life that looked flawless from a distance and felt, most days, like a beautifully decorated cage. I was CEO of Marsh Logistics, a company my grandfather, Harold Sinclair, had built from a single delivery truck in 1968 into a national freight empire before handing the reins to my father, and eventually, when my father's heart gave out at 59, to me. I had spent every year since proving I deserved the seat, outworking every board member who doubted a woman in her 30s could run a company this size, closing deals other executives called impossible, building a reputation as someone who did not get emotional, did not get distracted, and absolutely did not let sentiment interfere with strategy. My grandfather had taught me that philosophy himself, back when I was a teenager spending summers in his office instead of at camp like other kids my age. Sentiment is expensive, Victoria, he used to say, tapping his pen against whatever contract was on his desk. The moment you let your heart negotiate for you, you've already lost the deal. I built my entire adult identity around that sentence. I built a marriage around it too, one that ended in a clean, efficient, entirely unsentimental divorce 4 years ago, both of us walking away with exactly what the prenup specified and nothing more. I built a relationship with my own daughter, Ellie, 12 years old now, around a rotating cast of nannies and a promise, repeated every school event I missed, that I would make it up to her once the Hendricks acquisition closed, or the shareholder meeting passed, or the next impossible deadline finally let up. It never let up. I had simply stopped noticing. When my grandfather's assisted living facility called to say his condition had worsened significantly, congestive heart failure, the kind of decline where doctors start using the word weeks instead of years, I cleared exactly one afternoon in my calendar to see him. I told myself it was because I loved him. If I'm being honest, in that doorway, staring at a stranger holding his hand, I finally admitted to myself that some part of my hurry had also been about the will. My grandfather was worth considerably more than the company alone, decades of careful investment, real estate, a private trust nobody outside the family lawyer fully understood the details of. And I had heard, secondhand, through a cousin who loved gossip more than family gatherings, that he'd recently made some changes to his estate plans. I told myself I was visiting out of love. Some part of me had already started rehearsing what I'd say if the numbers had changed. His name, I would learn within the hour, was Marcus Reed. He was 34 years old, a single father to a 2-year-old daughter named Nia, currently asleep against his chest in a carrier that had clearly seen months of daily use. He worked as a home health aide, not through the facility itself, but privately hired 8 months earlier by my grandfather directly, after Harold had grown frustrated with what he called the revolving door of strangers the facility kept sending. I stood in the doorway for a full 10 seconds before either of them noticed me. In that 10 seconds I watched my grandfather, a man I had genuinely, at points in my life, believed incapable of unguarded affection, laugh at something Marcus said, a real laugh, the kind that used to be rare even when I was a child and he was decades younger and healthier. Victoria, my grandfather said, noticing me at last, his voice raspier than I remembered but his eyes still sharp. You made time. The comment landed exactly the way he intended it to, gentle but unmistakably pointed. I had not visited in 4 months. I knew it. He knew it. And apparently this stranger sitting beside his bed knew it too, based on the careful, neutral way he looked at me, like a man who'd heard my name mentioned before and was quietly reassessing whether the stories matched the person now standing in the doorway. Grandpa, I started and then stopped, unsure how to finish a sentence that would sound anything other than defensive. I've been buried at work. I know, my grandfather said, not unkindly. Just factually the way he used to describe a missed shipping deadline. This is Marcus. And this, he added, nodding toward the sleeping toddler, is Nia. She's got my sense of humor already. Scares the nurses? Marcus offered a polite, measured smile, the kind of smile you give when you're not sure yet whether the room is about to get tense. Good to finally meet you, Mrs. Sinclair Marsh. Your grandfather talks about you a lot. I wanted to ask what exactly he talked about. I wanted to ask a dozen things. Who was this man? Why did my grandfather trust him enough to hold his hand in a way I hadn't offered in years? Why hadn't anyone in the family mentioned a private aide had become this deeply embedded in his daily life? Instead, I asked the only question my instincts, sharpened by 2 decades in boardrooms, knew how to ask cleanly. How long have you been working with my grandfather? 8 months, Marcus said. Started 3 days a week. He asked for more hours about 4 months in. A small, genuine smile crossed his face, aimed at my grandfather rather than me. Man stubborn. Won't take his medication unless somebody sits with him and actually explains why it matters instead of just handing him a pill cup. My grandfather chuckled, weak but real. Damn right, nobody at this facility bothered explaining anything to me for 2 years. Marcus is the first person who talks to me like I've still got a working brain. I felt something uncomfortable settle in my chest, something I didn't have a name for yet. I want to be honest with you about something because this story doesn't work if I sanitize it. In the first several minutes of that visit, some small, ugly part of my mind, the part shaped by boardroom cynicism and a family history steeped in old money suspicion, had already started building a narrative. A stranger this close to my dying, wealthy grandfather. A man my family had never vetted, never approved, quietly working his way into hours of unsupervised access, holding hands, sharing laughs, becoming, by every appearance, closer to Harold Sinclair than his own granddaughter. I am not proud of where my mind went. But I'd be lying to you if I said it didn't go there, fast. The way
मेरे वालिद 11 साल पहले गायब हो गए थे पिछले महीने। इनकी गाड़ी हमारे घर के सामने खड़ी मिली। इंजन अभी तक गर्म था, लेकिन जो शख्स उसे यहाँ लाया वो मेरे वालिद नहीं थे। अबू उस वक्त दिन गायब हुए जब मैं 9 साल की थी। न कोई खत, न कोई निशान, बस एक खाली गिराज और एक माँ जो कभी सुकून से न सो सकी। 3 हफ्ते पहले मेरी आंख गाड़ी की रोशनियों से खुली। वही पुरानी नीली गाड़ी, वही बम्पर पर टेंट, वही टूटा हुआ साइड मिरर। मैं नंगे पांव बाहर भागी चीखती हुई, अबू अबू। गाड़ी खाली थी मगर ड्राइविंग सीट गर्म थी। चाबियां अब भी लगी हुई थी और डैशबोर्ड पर उनकी शादी की अंगूठी रखी थी, वही जो वो गायब होने वाले दिन पहने हुए थे।
If you're asking whether your grandfather trusts him more than he trusts most of his own family right now, that answer might be a little harder for you to hear. I stood in that hospital hallway feeling, for the first time in longer than I could remember, genuinely ashamed of myself. Not because my suspicion had been wrong about Marcus's intentions, though it was, but because it had taken me exactly 9 minutes in that room to start treating a man's quiet, consistent kindness toward my grandfather as a threat to investigate, instead of what it actually was. The kind of care I hadn't shown up to give myself. I went back into the room that afternoon with a different posture, though I didn't fully understand why yet. I stayed longer than the 40 minutes I'd budgeted. I listened. Marcus's story came out slowly, in pieces, over that visit and several that followed in the weeks after. He'd lost his wife, Nia's mother, to a sudden postpartum complication when Nia was only 4 months old, a loss so recent and so raw that he still occasionally referred to her in present tense before catching himself. He'd been a nurse before that, working in a cardiac unit, but had shifted to private home health work after her death. needing flexible hours that let him keep Nia with him rather than in daycare full-time, needing, in his own words, work that still felt like it mattered, but didn't ask me to disappear for 12-hour shifts while she grew up without me. My grandfather had been one of his first private clients. What started as a professional arrangement had become something neither of them, I suspect, fully expected. My grandfather, a man who had spent decades believing sentiment was a liability, had found in Marcus something he hadn't received from his own family in years: patient, unhurried presence without an agenda, without a calculation running underneath it. He asks about my daughter every single day, Marcus told me one afternoon, adjusting Nia's carrier as she stirred against his chest. Not in a polite, making conversation way, he remembers what I told him last time. Remembers her doctor's appointment was on a Tuesday and asks how it went on Wednesday. He paused, glancing toward my grandfather, who had drifted into a light sleep. I don't know much about your family, Mrs. Sinclair Marsh. That's not my business. But I know your grandfather lights up different when he talks about you than he does about almost anything else. He just doesn't think you have time to hear it anymore. That sentence undid something in me that 15 years of missed birthdays, missed calls, and carefully rationalized absences hadn't managed to undo on their own. Word travels fast in families like mine, and it wasn't long before my cousin Bradley, the same cousin who first mentioned changes to the estate, showed up at the facility uninvited, ostensibly to visit, but really, I suspected, to assess the situation with Marcus himself. Bradley did not extend to Marcus the same slow, private reckoning I'd been quietly working through. He was blunt, almost immediately, cornering me in the hallway after a visit where I watched him barely acknowledge Marcus's presence in the room at all. You need to deal with this, Bradley said, low and urgent. Some random guy spending this much time with Grandpa right before he's making changes to the will? Come on, Victoria, you run a company. You know exactly what this looks like. What it looks like, I said, or what you've decided to assume it is. Bradley's expression shifted, surprised by the pushback. You're seriously defending him? I'm asking you a question, I said. Have you spent 5 minutes in that room actually watching how Marcus treats Grandpa? Or did you walk in already deciding what kind of man he had to be? I heard myself asking Bradley the exact question I hadn't had the honesty to ask myself 9 minutes into my own first visit. The irony wasn't lost on me. I don't need to spend time with him to see what's obvious, Bradley said. A stranger this close to a dying man's money? He's not close to the money, Bradley, I said, sharper than I meant to. He's close to Grandpa. There's a difference, and if you'd spent any real time in that room instead of doing math in your head, you'd already know it. Bradley left frustrated, unconvinced, muttering something about protecting the family's interests on his way out. I stood in that hallway and realized, with a clarity that felt almost physically uncomfortable, that I was no longer the person building the suspicious narrative. I had become, somehow, the person defending against it, and I owed that shift entirely to a man who had shown me, patiently and without ever asking to, exactly how shallow my own instincts had been. My grandfather passed away 6 weeks later, peacefully in the early morning hours, with my hand in his on one side and Marcus's on the other, a detail I insisted on, and one I know, without a doubt, my grandfather would have wanted. The will reading happened 2 weeks after the funeral. I'll be honest, some old, unexamined part of me still braced for what Bradley's suspicions had planted, some fear that Marcus's presence in those final months had somehow reshaped the estate in unexpected ways. It hadn't, not in the way Bradley feared. The company, the majority of the estate, remained structured exactly as it always had been, divided among family as my grandfather had planned for years. But there was one addition, a single provision added just 3 months before his death. A modest but meaningful trust fund, established directly for Nia's education. Along with a personal letter addressed to Marcus that the attorney read aloud, my grandfather's exact words, dictated and notarized while he was still sharp enough to be certain of every syllable. Marcus, you gave me back something my own family, in their busyness, sometimes forgot to offer. The simple experience of being seen every single day without an agenda attached to it. This isn't payment for that. Nothing could be. It's just my way of making sure your daughter's future has a little more room in it, the way you made sure my last month's did. Bradley, sitting 3 chairs down, said nothing. I watched something shift in his expression, not quite an apology, but something close to the beginning of one. I didn't fire Bradley from the board, though I'd have been within my rights. Given how openly he tried to build a case against a man who'd done nothing but show my grandfather more genuine care than most of our family had managed in years. I didn't publicly shame him for the assumption he'd made, or the one I'd quietly made myself before catching it. Instead, I did something that would have surprised the version of myself standing in that hospital doorway 6 weeks earlier. I offered Marcus a permanent position, not as a hired aide, since there was no longer anyone left for him to care for in that capacity, but as the head of a new division within Marsh Logistics. Employee wellness and family support services built specifically around the kind of patient, dignified care he'd shown my grandfather, extended now to thousands of employees who'd spent decades being treated, much like I had treated my own family, as line items instead of people. He accepted cautiously at first, then once he saw I meant every word of it fully. I run Marsh Logistics differently now. Not dramatically, the numbers still matter, the deals still get made, I'm still, by most standards, exactly the kind of demanding CEO I've always been. But I leave the office by 6 most days now, most days, to make it to Ellie's swim meets, to the dinners I used to reschedule, to the ordinary, unremarkable moments I used to consider too small to interrupt a calendar full of things that felt, at the time, so much more urgent. I think about that hospital doorway often. The 10 seconds I spent watching a stranger hold my grandfather's hand and immediately, instinctively, treating it as a threat instead of what it actually was. A lesson, arriving exactly when I needed it, in a form I never would have chosen for myself. Here's what I've learned, and it's the reason I wanted to tell you this story tonight. We build our whole lives sometimes around the belief that sentiment is a liability, that love that isn't calculated is love that isn't safe. And then, if we're lucky, someone shows up, a stranger, an outsider, someone we were quick to suspect for no better reason than our own fear, and shows us, without ever raising their voice, exactly how much we'd forgotten how to give. My grandfather taught me how to build an empire. Marcus taught me in the last 6 weeks of my grandfather's life how to actually show up for the people inside it. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever caught yourself judging someone before you'd taken the time to actually see them, I want you to know something. The people who challenge our assumptions the most are often the ones who end up teaching us the most. Don't let pride or suspicion keep you standing in the doorway when there's still time to walk in and actually see what's in front of you. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, subscribe, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and I'll see you in the next one.